Louis XIV, known as Louis the Great or the Sun King, was a monarch of the House of Bourbon who ruled as King of France from 1643 until his death. His reign of 72 years and 110 days is the longest of any monarch of a major country in European history. Louis began his personal rule of France in 1661 after the death of his chief minister, the Italian Cardinal Mazarin, an adherent of the concept of the divine right of kings, which advocates the divine origin of monarchical rule. Louis continued his predecessor's work of creating a centralized state governed from the capital. He sought to eliminate the remnants of feudalism persisting in parts of France and, by compelling many members of the nobility to inhabit his lavish palace of Versailles, succeeded in pacifying the aristocracy, many members of which had participated in the Fronde Rebellion during Louis's minority. By these means he became one of the most powerful French monarchs and consolidated a system of absolute monarchical rule in France that endured until the French Revolution. During Louis's reign, France was the leading European power and it fought three major wars: the Franco-Dutch War, the War of the League of Augsburg, and the War of the Spanish Succession. There were also two lesser conflicts: the War of Devolution and the War of the Reunions. Louis encouraged and benefited from the work of prominent political, military, and cultural figures such as Mazarin, Colbert, the Grand Condé, Turenne and Vauban, as well as Molière, Racine, Boileau, La Fontaine, Lully, Marat, Lebrun, Rigaud, Bossuet, Livaux, Mansart, Charles and Claude Perrault, and Le Notre. Upon his death just days before his 77th birthday, Louis was succeeded by his 5-year-old great-grandson, Louis XV. All of his intermediate heirs predeceased him. His son Louis, Le Grand Dauphin, the Dauphin's eldest son Louis, Duke of Burgundy, and Burgundy's eldest son Louis, Duke of Brittany. Early years. Louis XIV was born on 5 September 1638 in the Château de Saint-Germain en later Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. He was named Louis Dieudonné and also bore the traditional title of French heirs apparent, Dauphin. At the time of his birth, his parents had been married for 23 years. His mother had experienced 4 stillbirths between 1619 and 1631. Leading contemporaries thus regarded him as a divine gift, and his birth a miracle of God. Sensing imminent death, Louis XIII decided to put his affairs in order in the spring of 1643, when Louis XIV was 4 years old. In defiance of custom, which would have made Queen Anne the sole regent of France, he decreed that a regency council would rule on his son's behalf. His lack of faith in Queen Anne's political abilities was the primary reason. He did, however, make the concession of appointing her head of the council. Louis's relationship with his mother was uncommonly affectionate for the time. Contemporaries and eyewitnesses claimed that the Queen would spend all her time with Louis. Both were greatly interested in food and theatre, and it is highly likely that Louis developed these interests through his close relationship with his mother. This long-lasting and loving relationship can be evidenced by excerpts in Louis's journal entries. Nature was responsible for the first knot which tied me to my mother, but attachments formed later by shared qualities of the spirit are far more difficult to break than those formed merely by blood. It was his mother who gave Louis his belief in the absolute and divine power of his monarchical rule. In 1646, Nicolas V de Villeroy became the young king's tutor. Louis XIV became friends with his young children, particularly François de Villeroy, and divided his time between the Palais Royal and the nearby Hôtel de Villeroy minority and the Fronde. On 13 May 1643, with Louis XIII dead, Queen Anne had her husband's will annulled by the Parlement de Paris. This action abolished the Regency Council and made Anne sole regent of France. Anne exiled some of her husband's ministers and she nominated Brienne as her Minister of Foreign Affairs. She also nominated Saint Vincent de Paul as her spiritual advisor, which helped her deal with religious policy and the Jansenism question. Anne kept the direction of religious policy strongly in her hand until 1661. Her most important political decision was to nominate Cardinal Mazarin as her chief minister, and her decision to continue her husband and Richelieu policy in spite of their persecution of her for the sake of her son. Anne wanted to give her son an absolute authority and a victorious kingdom. Her choice of Mazarin was mainly because of his ability and his total dependence on her, at least until 1653, when she was no longer regent. Anne protected Mazarin by arresting and exiling her followers who conspired against him in 1643, the Duke of Beaufort and Marie de Rohan. She left the direction of the daily administration of policy to Cardinal Mazarin. The best example of Anne's statesmanship and the partial change in her heart towards her country of birth, Spain, is seen in her keeping of one of Richelieu's men, the Chancellor of France Pierre Séguier, in his post. Séguier was the person who interrogated Anne in 1637, treating her like a common criminal, as she herself described her treatment following the discovery that she was giving military secrets and informations to Spain. Anne, who was virtually under house arrest for a number of years during her husband's rule, was physically searched and almost insulted by the Chancellor, according to certain sources. By keeping him in his post, Anne was giving a sign that the interests of France and her son Louis were the guiding spirit of all her political and legal actions. It was not that the Queen was totally against Spain, but she wanted to end the war with a French victory in order to establish a lasting peace between the Catholic nations. The Queen also gave a partial Catholic orientation to France's foreign policy, which was felt by the Netherlands, the Protestant ally of France, which negotiated a separate peace with Spain in 1648. In 1648, Anne and Mazarin successfully negotiated the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War in Germany. Its terms ensured Dutch independence from Spain, awarded some autonomy to the various German princes of the Holy Roman Empire, and granted Sweden seats on the imperial diet and territories to control the mouths of the Oder, Elbe, and Weser rivers. France, however, profited most from the settlement. Austria, ruled by the Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand III, moreover, eager to emancipate themselves from Habsburg domination, petty German states sought French protection. This anticipated the formation of the 1658 League of the Rhine, leading to the further diminution of imperial power. As the 30 Years' War came to an end, a civil war known as the Fronde erupted in France. It effectively checked France's ability to exploit the Peace of Westphalia. Anne and Mazarin had largely pursued the policies of Cardinal Richelieu, augmenting the crown's power at the expense of the nobility and the parlements, and interfered much more in internal policy than foreign affairs. She was a very proud queen who insisted on the divine rights of the King of France. All this led her to advocate a forceful policy in all matters relating to the king authority in a manner that was much more radical than the one proposed by Mazarin. The cardinal, who depended totally on Anne's support, has to use all his influence on the Queen in order not to nullify but to restrain some of her radical actions. Anne imprisoned any aristocrat or member of parliament who challenged her will. Her main aims was to transfer to her son an absolute authority in the matters of finance and justice. She went as far as jailing leaders of the Parlement of Paris, and one of them even died in prison. The Frondeurs, political heirs of a dissatisfied feudal aristocracy, sought to protect their traditional feudal privileges from an increasingly centralized royal government. Furthermore, they believed their traditional influence and authority was being usurped by the recently ennobled bureaucrats who administered the kingdom and on whom the monarchy increasingly began to rely. This belief intensified their resentment. In 1648, Anne and Mazarin attempted to tax members of the Parlement de Paris. The members not only refused to comply, but also ordered all of his earlier financial edicts burned. Buoyed by the victory of Louis, Duc d'Enghien at the Battle of Lens, Mazarin, on Queen Anne's insistence, arrested certain members in a show of force. The most important arrest from an point of view concerned Pierre Broussel, one of the most important leaders in the Parlement de Paris. People in France were complaining about the expansion of royal authority, the high rate of taxation and the reduction of the authority of the Parlement de Paris, and other regional representatives entities. Paris erupted in rioting as a result, and Anne was forced under intense pressure to liberate Broussel. A mob of angry Parisians broke into the royal palace and demanded to see their king. Led into the royal bedchamber, they gazed upon Louis, who was feigning sleep, were appeased, and quietly departed. The threat to the royal family prompted Anne to flee Paris with the king and his courtiers. Shortly thereafter, the conclusion of the Peace of Westphalia allowed Condé's army to return to aid Louis and his court. Condé, whose family was close to Anne at that period of time, agreed to help her in her attempt to restore the king authority. Beaufort, who escaped from the prison where Anne imprisoned him 5 years before, was the military leader in Paris under the nominal control of Condé. After a few battles, a political compromise was reached. The Peace of Rueil was signed and the court returned to Paris. Unfortunately for Anne, her partial victory depended on Condé, who wanted to control the Queen and to destroy the influence of Mazarin. It was Condé's sister who pushed him to turn against the Queen. After striking a deal with her old friend Marie de Rohan, who was able to impose the nomination of Chateauneuf as Minister of Justice, and arrested Condé, his brother Armand de Bourbon, Prince of Conti, and the husband of their sister Anne Geneviève de Bourbon, Duchess of Longueville. This situation did not last very long, and the unpopularity of Mazarin led to the creation of a coalition who was headed mainly by Marie de Rohan, the Duchess of Longueville. All these events will be witnessed by Louis and would largely explain his later distrust of Paris and the higher aristocracy. In one sense, Louis's childhood came to an end with the outbreak of the Fronde. It was not only that life became insecure and unpleasant, a fate meted out to many children in all ages, but that Louis had to be taken into the confidence of his mother and Mazarin in political and military matters of which he could have no deep understanding. The royal family was driven out of Paris twice in this manner, and at one point Louis XIV and Anne were held under virtual arrest in the royal palace in Paris. The Fronde years planted in Louis a hatred of Paris and a consequent determination to move out of the ancient capital as soon as possible, never to return. Just as the first Fronde ended, a second one began. Unlike that which preceded it, tales of sordid intrigue and half-hearted warfare characterized this second phase of upper-class insurrection. To the aristocracy, this rebellion represented a protest against and a reversal of their political demotion from vassals to courtiers. It was headed by the highest-ranking French nobles, among them Louis's uncle Gaston, Duke of Orléans, and first cousin Anne-Marie Louise d'Orléans, Duchess of Montpensier, known as La Grande Mademoiselle, princes of the blood such as Condé, his brother Armand, Prince of Conti, and their sister the Duchess of Longueville, dukes of legitimized royal descent, such as Henry, Duke of Longueville, and François, Duke of Beaufort, so-called foreign princes, such as Frédéric Maurice, Duke of Bouillon, his brother Marshal Turenne, and Marie de Rohan, Duchess of Chevreuse, and scions of France's oldest families, such as François de la Rochefoucauld. Queen Anne played the most important role in defeating the Fronde because she wanted to transfer absolute authority to her son. In addition, most of the princes refused to deal with Mazarin, who went into exile for a number of years. The Frondeurs claimed to act on Louis's behalf and in his real interest against his mother and Mazarin. Queen Anne had a very close relationship with the cardinal, and many observers believed that Mazarin became Louis XIV's stepfather by a secret marriage to Queen Anne. However, Louis's coming of age and subsequent coronation deprived them of the Fronde as pretext for revolt. The Fronde thus gradually lost steam and ended in 1653, when Mazarin returned triumphantly from exile. During this period, Louis fell in love with Mazarin's niece Marie Mancini. But Anne and Mazarin ended the king's infatuation by sending Mancini away from court to be married in Italy. While Mazarin might have been tempted for a short period of time to marry his niece to the King of France, Queen Anne was absolutely against this. She wanted to marry her son to the daughter of her brother the Spanish king for both dynastic and political reasons. Mazarin soon supported the Queen position because he knew that her support for his power and his foreign policy depended on making peace with Spain, from a strong position and on the Spanish marriage. In addition, Mazarin's relations with Marie Mancini were not good and he did not trusted her to support his position. All Louis' tears and his supplications to his mother did not make her change her mind. The Spanish marriage was very important not only for its role in ending the war between France and Spain but also in the fact that much of the claims and objectives of Louis' foreign policy in the next 50 years would be based on this marriage.